in a meeting of SDE. Lena asked me to write about gratitude. And she asked me at a time when I when I was going through immense difficulties, and it was the last subject I wanted to talk about. It was not the first time that I had gone through a period of great difficulty, mostly associated with my work. And it set me thinking. Lena's invitation set me thinking about what gratitude is, what it does for us, and what it does for the kingdom as well. So I've put together the few thoughts that I'm going to share with you. I've done it more as a kind of meditation, but then I'd invite you to think a little bit about your own practice when you meet with directees, particularly those who are coming out of trauma or periods of intense difficulty or prolonged difficulty. I'm going to share the screen, and I'll project a few slides. Here we are. So this is, as I said, a meditation. Those of you who have visited Malta may have been to sanctuaries, churches, generally quite small churches, where on the side of the main altar, there is a chamber with sometimes hundreds of paintings of the kind that I'm just projecting. We call these ex votos. You can see a sailing ship being battered by waves. This is a 19th century image. And in the top left-hand corner, just barely visible, is a picture of the crucifix of Christ on the way to Calvary. He's carrying the cross. At the bottom of the painting is a narrative, generally in Italian, which was the principal language of communication in the 19th century, recounting the story. This painting would have been commissioned by a sailor or a passenger who was saved from shipwreck. As I said, there are hundreds of these in Malta. Another image comes from a large sanctuary. It is, in fact, the principal Marian shrine in Malta, Tapinu, on the island of Gozo. In those frames, you will see quite a variety of objects. Many of them are pieces of clothing. Sometimes there will be part of a crutch. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner a crash helmet from a motorcycle. And almost invariably, there is a short story explaining that this is being offered in gratitude for a favor received. Generally, a favor of healing, freedom from fear, or freedom from mortal danger. One of those voting offerings was actually donated by Pope John Paul II, who is seen here visiting the sanctuary. On a visit to Lebanon, shortly after he became Pope, his aeroplane developed a mechanical fault, just as it was flying in the airspace of the Maltese Islands. And his secretary suggested that they pray to Our Lady of Tapinu, as she is known. The Pope had just visited Malta. And so the account goes, the mechanical failure disappeared no sooner had the Pope begun praying. And he donated a very small votive frame recounting this story to the sanctuary. These are popular, pious expressions of gratitude, and I suppose they're mostly familiar in the Catholic world, and particularly the world of the North Mediterranean. What is gratitude? The root of the word comes from the Latin meaning grace. To be grateful is to have an attitude of being filled with grace, or perhaps the attitude of a person who is aware of dwelling in the presence of grace. We can learn a little bit about gratitude from Luke's account of the healing of 10 lepers. Now, as you undoubtedly know, in the first century Middle East, to be a leper was in effect a death sentence. Lepers were outcasts. They had to wear distinctive clothing. They had to carry signs or to cry out saying that they were unclean. The association between uncleanliness and illness and sin or ritual uncleanliness was very pronounced. Here is what Luke has to say. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? The other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God, except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." There is so much about gratitude in this short account. And I've selected 4 phrases. The 10 lepers kept their distance. These are stricken men, ritually and physically unclean. For us, for those who come to us for accompaniment, sin or profound grief, serious illness, addiction perhaps, professional failure, disappointment, resentments, angers, conflicts. These are common experiences that separate us in some way from society. When we are conscious of this separation, we approach those who could help us deferentially. We feel humiliated and we fear rejection, which is why there is this ambivalence. The lepers come to Jesus, but they keep their distance. Jesus offers no word of consolation to the men. He simply sends them to the priests. He seems cold, insisting on a ritual which is at one and the same time humiliating and also liberating. The priests were not only the intermediaries between Jews and God, they were also the repositories of medical knowledge at the time. they were, under the law, they were charged with responsibility for certifying that somebody was both ritually clean and also physically clean. In other words, free of disfiguring disease. This presentation to the priests I likened to the experience of confession. Approaching the priest is always a somewhat intimidating experience, but it's also a profoundly liberating experience. The Jewish priests and our priests and pastors today symbolize, I think, a very important truth. Healing requires the restoration of both the body and the spirit. So let's return to the account. One leper returned, praising God, because he became aware on the way to the temple that he'd been healed. And his action on seeing Jesus is to prostrate himself at Jesus' feet. Gratitude, the kind expressed so dramatically, so vividly by this man, restores relationships. It restores intimacy. This man, who as a leper had to keep his distance from Jesus, now can touch Jesus's feet. He prostrates himself at Jesus's feet. And the gesture reminds me of the woman who came to Jesus while he was at table and prostrated herself at his feet, anointed him, and then wiped his feet with her hair. But there is, I think, something even more profound in this account. This leper, or former leper, rediscovered in his healing the purpose of human existence as the principle and foundation of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius says. Human beings are created to praise, to revere, and to serve God our Lord, and by these means to become saved themselves, to be saved themselves. And in his turning back, in the praise that he gave God loudly, we are told, in his prostrating himself at the feet of Jesus, and then in obeying Jesus' command to go and resume his life, he was doing all these things. He may not have cognitively experienced or understood the purpose of human existence, but he lived it in the way he behaved, to praise, to revere, and to serve God. Jesus told him, "Your faith saved you." And to me, this signifies that faith and gratitude are intimately linked. At the moment when our gratitude begins to wane, probably in the middle of a crisis, a personal crisis, our faith also weakens, and vice versa. The quickening of our faith also quickens our gratitude. In this account, I recognize 4 spiritual movements. The most obvious is the man's inner movement from humiliation, a leper excluded from society, unclean ritually, unclean in his body, to humility, which is altogether different. He prostrates himself at the feet of Jesus. The second movement is the movement from isolation, social isolation, perhaps even alienation, from his very self to encounter. He returns and meets Jesus. And he is also restored in the fullness of his humanity. There is clearly a movement from grief, the existential grief of being isolated, unwell, at death's door, in a crisis or failing, to joy, the joy of living fully. And this account also reminds me of the parable of the prodigal son and the father's words that he was restored to life, having been dead. And in the same way, this leper, in being healed and in living that with gratitude, is restored from death to new life. Here's a little quote from A. Milne's lovely stories. Piglet noticed that even though he had a very small heart, it could hold a rather large amount of gratitude. So, in the course of the next few minutes, you could even take 10 minutes because I'm slightly ahead of time. You might ponder one or two of these questions. The first are essentially personal questions. How does failure or disappointment or grief or resentment or my own sinfulness affect me? What attitude comes to the fore when I am freed of these afflictions? Sometimes, when I look at myself, and occasionally as well with directees, the prevailing attitude is relief. Oh, it's gone, thankfully. But gratitude is something deeper, as we've just seen. When I'm freed of what afflicts me, to whom do I return? Is it to Jesus, to God, the source of my healing and the destination of my life? Or perhaps to something else or to someone else? In what ways do I express gratitude, and to whom or with whom do I express gratitude? And if you're a child of the 21st century, where everything has to be measured, you might ask, how much gratitude does my very small heart hold? You might also like to reflect on your practice of spiritual direction and what place gratitude holds in that, and how you help directees, particularly in the crucial first week of the exercises, when they come face to face with not only their sin, but the sinfulness of humanity. How do you help them return to faith in God, in God's mercy, and how do you help them to express gratitude, or even to feel gratitude in the first place? For the present, this is what I have to share. I will share something when we return to the plenary. I'd just like to close with an observation. On the 23rd of November, just 2 days ago, in the United States and elsewhere, Thanksgiving was celebrated. Thanksgiving that looks back on the harvest in the days of the first settlers and pioneers. And in a short while, we're going to be celebrating Advent. Whenever I hear somebody speaking about Advent, the emphasis is always on waiting. But I also think of Advent as the celebration of our gratitude for a God who takes on human form. So, Timu, unless there are questions or things that people would like me to clarify, Timu, you can send us to our breakout groups.
Thank you, Edward. Before Timu will send us to our breakout groups, I would like to ask you to leave this slide on,
yes.
On here, and
yes.
We will spend the next 7 minutes by meditating, praying, and let's have these questions in front of our eyes. And after the 7 minutes, we will go in our breakout rooms, okay?
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you, Edward. And unfortunately, I not asked anybody to share in our group, but maybe I can ask Teresa to share a little bit what we talked.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. What we talked about was the fact that when we have problems, very often, we have to grasp onto gratitude. And Mary very beautifully told about a situation where it's a process in which you have to somehow grasp on to gratitude and how it grows then and is healing, as Edward pointed out about the leper that came to Jesus. And our discussion in our group then was about that in many ways. Also, the significance of ways of showing gratitude that was brought out. Edward brought it out very beautifully about the votive offerings. And this was brought up too about gathering respect for people who have been cured and have been able in a simple way to show their gratitude. And what this does in our lives in general. I think I've summed it up. I hope. Is there something else, please, that I've forgotten?
Does anybody want to say something more in our group?
Yeah, I just want to say that sometimes we wait until somebody has died, and then we are very generous in bringing up symbols of their lives and being grateful for that. And yet, I think myself that people in their later years should harvest their, should be encouraged maybe to harvest their lives in a way that they bring the harvest. Poets have done it so beautifully, but so I think harvesting is, and then gratitude, a prayer of gratitude can be very powerful. That's really, as I'm dealing probably with people in the later stages of life, I mean, even when I look around, I don't think too many people are at in the flush of their youth. But so I think it's relevant for all of us to harvest the blessings of our lives.
Thank you, Una. The next group, Lea, who is presenting in your group?
Yeah, I think if it's Lehel's group, then I will share. I was asked to share. So some things that I picked up and that sounded out from our group were how people sometimes or even often every day struggle with how to remember to be grateful every day, and how to pick out, and they find it helpful to have reminders of what we are saved from. Visual symbols have helped people in also to remember from when Edward was sharing about the Malta, how the visual symbols the people have brought that reminded them of this infliction that they were saved out from. And somebody in our group shared that even though they take part of Eucharist very often, they can't take wine because they used to be alcoholic, but how the picture of the wine on the wall reminds them of the reason and means of how they were saved. And there was somebody who shared their story of a burnout in the midst of very difficult family situation, even when the children were little. But when they were starting to come out from the burnout, then there were little exercises of being thankful and noticing little small things every day, and that's how they came out from burnout. And not only came out from burnout, but they were filled with joy, and that was really awesome. And there was a reminder to be careful with connecting suffering and or connecting sin and sickness. And on that point, I didn't share it, but I was thinking also that it is difficult when people suffer. They're sick, and they think it's punishment. They experience evil, and it makes it even more difficult to be grateful. But then we have to be careful in a spiritual direction. We have to be humble with people and gentle with people, because their theology might not even allow them to it is difficult for them to get to the place of thankfulness in that. But we can help them. Examine. Several people brought out how the practice of examine, practice of examine, helps to see God's presence every day, and and also how awesome it is to write it down, the gratitude, how it builds them up. And then was shared how celebration of Eucharist almost every day, maybe it is kind of a routine, but how today during Edward's reflection, it somehow suddenly became much more, it's like enlightenment in that sense, how gratitude and Eucharist go hand in hand from our part. That is from me. And right now I just picked up what I thought today, the most beautiful sentence I heard today. I think Una shared it, that we harvest the blessings. It's a beautiful sentence. I like it.
Thank you, Anneli. And we have third group.
Yeah, Liz is going to tell us something.
Yes, we began thinking about how getting older makes us more grateful, more aware, more thankful, especially the little things. We also talked about the examen and how that opens us up to gratitude for little things that we might not otherwise notice. And then the discussion took a turn towards thinking about how being grateful for good things, whether it's our coffee in the morning or our good health, how those things are affected by the troubles of the world, and how we can almost feel a sense of guilt at being grateful for the comforts of life that we have. And we reflected on that at length together, and we talked about how it can lead to a stance of humility and trust. And also someone said that it's important that we still feel sorrow for the world and its troubles, and yet we can still be grateful as well at the same time. So being grateful mustn't leave us sort of inward looking, but we can still feel deeply the pain of the world. And then at the end, we were talking about choosing. We can choose to trust. So we talked a lot about trust and choosing again to trust God in spite of all that's going on.
Thank you.
I think that's what we talked about mostly.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Liz. We still have some minutes, a couple of minutes, and maybe Edward, you want to say something finally, or somebody have, thoughts or question to Edward?
I'd just like to respond to what Liz has just said, that the question, I think I'm right in saying the question of trust was around the true belief that God is ultimately managing things and is ultimately in control, although what that means is complex, I know, but that despite all that we see, we're asked to trust that he's greater than all the evil or whatever. So the trust is in the context of accepting God's in charge.
Yeah, if I can just tag on to that, because I also was having a response to the final comment, was that, choosing to trust God, sometimes I find myself asking why did this happen? Why does that happen? Why is there suffering in the world, or in my family or in myself? And I've come to accept that there's a certain amount of mystery that we have to live, and we live within the mystery. And we're living in God's time, here on earth and beyond our time on earth. And so maybe that why, where I can make the shift to being grateful, even in the midst of why is, well, maybe the answer will come in another generation. Maybe my son's son will understand what happened to his grandmother or great grandmother. Why did this happen? Will bring some light or some closeness to in their relationship to God. That so the answer is not my business. Maybe I can ask the question, but I need to be able to live in the mystery of the why and be grateful that, be grateful in that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We still we all
for this question of why, I think we can rearrange it and reframe it and say how to cope whenever something happens, how to go on, how to remain faithful to the one who created us and who keeps us alive. That can be that's also will still remain in the mystery, but maybe we are not so much in despair that we don't know the reason why it happened. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Edward, one more time. Thank you. Wonderful.
Can I close with
Yes.
one last slide? It won't take more than a minute. So I'm going to share the screen again. And I mentioned earlier on when I was speaking that Advent can be regarded as the festival of gratitude. And I say this because at the center of Advent are two women who have experienced what it is to be gifted abundantly by God, by God's mercy. And Mary's prayer, the Magnificat, I think captures this, what gratitude is, very well. And it also reconciles what we were saying earlier, the individual gratitude and a sense of gratitude for a whole world, even though it is so tumultuous. So if you like, we can recite this together. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has looked with favor on his lowly servant. From this day, all generations will call me blessed. The Almighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name. He has mercy on
those who fear him.
In every generation. He has shown the strength of his arm. He has scattered the proud. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones. Has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things. The rich he has sent away empty. He has come to the help of his servant Israel. For he remembered his promised mercy. Promise he made to Abraham and his children forever. Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you so much.